Every major network had cut to live coverage. Millions of viewers at home were glued to their screens. And at the center of it all stood one man, Donald Trump. Known for his confidence, his brash style, and his ability to dominate any room, Trump was not here merely to answer questions. He was here to assert control. From the moment he entered, his posture spoke volumes. Shoulders squared, chin slightly raised, eyes scanning the room with calculated focus. He adjusted his microphone with deliberate precision. Every move was intentional, every gesture designed to project authority. And then, a few seats away, sitting upright, composed, ready, was Jasmine Crockett. Unlike the president, she radiated calm focus, a poised energy that contrasted sharply with the charged intensity of the room. She was here to be heard, not to perform theatrically. The moderator stepped up. Cameras shifted to capture the start of the discussion. The first question was simple, policy-focused, a seemingly straightforward opener. Trump answered with confidence, his tone sharp, his voice strong. He looked relaxed, almost amused, as if the room itself existed solely for his performance. His answers were polished, structured, calculated to impress both the live audience and millions of viewers at home. The tension built quietly, under the surface, as everyone sensed that this was more than just a typical debate moment. Then the second question came, and it wasn't directed at Trump. It was addressed to Jasmine Crockett. The moment her name was spoken, the atmosphere shifted perceptibly. Trump leaned back in his chair, folding his arms, eyes narrowing slightly. The crowd didn't react audibly, but the shift in energy was undeniable. Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She spoke calmly, clearly, delivering her points in measured cadence. Her words were precise, fact-based, intentional. She wasn't there to provoke. She was there to assert clarity and credibility. The camera caught glimpses of audience members, heads nodding subtly, eyebrows furrowed, attention locked. Even without theatrics, the presence of her composure created a palpable tension. And Trump noticed it. A slight tightening around his eyes, a subtle shake of the head, the body language of a man preparing to interject, to assert dominance. Yet he remained silent, watching, calculating his next move. Crockett continued, point by point, refusing to deviate from a steady rhythm. Each statement was deliberate, each argument grounded in evidence. She didn't attack, insult, or dramatize. She disagreed directly, confidently, and factually. And that, perhaps more than anything, seemed to unsettle Trump. The contrast between his assertive dominance and her calm, factual approach was beginning to command attention. Then the moderator turned back to Trump for his response. He leaned forward, smiled, that familiar, knowing smile, and addressed her directly, slowly, deliberately. Questions about her experience, credibility, understanding of the policy at hand. His tone wasn't loud, it wasn't shouting, but it was sharp, calculated. Each word carried weight, each phrase designed to challenge, to pressure. The audience felt it. The room seemed to lean in collectively, as if waiting for the next move in this high-stakes exchange. The camera caught Crockett's reaction, still, calm, composed. No rolling eyes, no visible frustration. Her posture unshaken, her focus unwavering. And yet, if one looked closely, it was clear that this exchange had set the stage for something more significant than a simple debate moment. The tension was like a taut wire, vibrating with anticipation, ready to snap at any point. Trump continued to build his case, references to past statements, hints at inconsistencies, framing his remarks as just asking questions. But the phrasing, the pauses, the deliberate emphasis, it was more than a question. It was a challenge, a strategic move designed to unsettle and dominate. Every person in the room recognized it. This was no longer just a Q&A. It had become a subtle battle for control. As the exchange progressed, the energy in the room shifted. The audience, initially passive, started reacting subtly. Murmurs, slight movements, a shift in body language. The moderator intervened, attempting to maintain order, but the underlying tension was palpable. Crockett's composure contrasted sharply with Trump's aggressive posture, highlighting a silent power struggle. Each moment she remained calm, precise, and measured, the more Trump's dominance was subtly questioned. The significance of these opening exchanges cannot be overstated. They were not about shouting over each other or creating viral soundbites. They were about presence, command, and psychological positioning. Crockett's calm, methodical approach was quietly drawing attention, establishing credibility, and setting the stage for a pivotal turning point. Then the rules for the next segment were announced. 3 direct questions, brief answers, no interruptions. The parameters were clear. Trump adjusted his jacket, regaining composure and confidence, preparing to leverage his experience and charisma. Crockett remained poised, hands folded, sitting upright, ready to respond with measured precision. The tension in the room, already thick, felt electric. Everyone knew that these 3 questions could set the tone for the remainder of the debate. The audience at home and in the room could sense it. This was more than a debate. This was a moment of power dynamics, a quiet confrontation that would be remembered not for volume, but for strategy, composure, and execution. As the second segment began, the tension in the room had already reached a simmer. What started as a routine live television debate was evolving into something far more intense. Donald Trump, confident as ever, had initially projected calm authority, but Jasmine Crockett's measured responses had begun to subtly disrupt the rhythm he was accustomed to controlling. The cameras captured every movement. Trump shifted in his seat, eyes narrowing ever so slightly, scanning the audience and then flicking back to Crockett. His smirk remained, but there was a tension underneath it now, a sign that he was processing a challenge that wasn't easily dismissed. Crockett, on the other hand, maintained her calm composure. Her posture was upright, her hands folded neatly in front of her, her eyes steady. There was no overreaction, no theatrics, only focus and precision. The second question had already set the stage. Crockett answered confidently, factually, without raising her voice. The audience reacted steadily. Nods, murmurs of approval, small gestures that indicated recognition of her points. Even those who were initially supportive of Trump could sense the contrast. Here was a politician who wasn't being swayed by the intimidating presence of a former president. She was holding her ground. Trump leaned forward slightly, his hands moving in deliberate gestures as he began to respond. But instead of the usual smooth domination of the room, his words now carried a sharper edge. He questioned her experience, subtly highlighting perceived gaps in her understanding. He questioned credibility, hinting at inconsistencies in past statements, framing it as concern for the policies under discussion. His tone was calculated, not loud, but pointed, deliberate, strategic. Every word was intended to unsettle, to assert dominance, to regain control. Crockett didn't flinch. She acknowledged the points without aggression. She clarified, corrected where necessary, and continued presenting her arguments calmly, methodically. She didn't counterattack. Instead, she reinforced her position with clarity and precision. Every time she spoke, the tension in the room increased. The audience began to realize that this wasn't simply a debate, it was a psychological duel. The more poised she remained, the more Trump's attempts at control appeared strained. The moderator attempted to maintain structure, reminding participants to stick to the time limits, to avoid interruptions. But the energy in the room was electric. The audience sensed the shift in power dynamics. A few heads turned, whispers rippled through the rows, and the camera angles emphasized the tension. Close-ups on Trump's focused gaze, slow pans across Crockett's calm expressions, reactions from the audience highlighting the subtle drama unfolding. Trump pressed on. References to past statements, subtle critiques, insinuations about approach and priorities, all designed to challenge Crockett. Yet she remained unfazed. Her calm approach was methodical. She repeated points when necessary, clarified misinterpretations, and used pauses strategically. Each pause was like a beat in a musical score, emphasizing control, restraint, and credibility. The contrast between her composure and Trump's increasingly animated style created a dynamic tension that was palpable on screen. At one point, Trump attempted to interject, speaking slightly over her, testing boundaries, trying to regain control. The moderator intervened, asserting the rules. The interruption itself highlighted the subtle battle occurring. Trump's energy was slightly more erratic now. He was attempting to dominate not through facts but through presence, pacing, and confidence. Crockett continued uninterrupted, her poise emphasizing a different kind of power, one rooted in calm authority and strategic communication. Audience reactions became a secondary narrative. Camera angles caught subtle expressions, curiosity, admiration, tension, and occasional disagreement. Viewers at home could sense it too. This was no ordinary exchange. The narrative was unfolding in real time. Trump's usual command of the room was being tested, while Crockett's measured responses were earning recognition and building credibility. The second question segment revealed key aspects of their political strategies. Trump relied on assertive projection, dominance through volume, and rhetorical pressure. Crockett relied on clarity, precision, factual grounding, and strategic pauses. Both approaches were effective in their own way, yet the contrast became increasingly apparent.
The audience wasn't just listening for the content, they were observing tone, control, and psychological positioning. Then came a moment that subtly shifted the momentum. Crockett, answering a follow-up point, referenced specific instances of policy discussions, public statements, and historical context. She did not raise her voice. She did not engage in dramatics. She simply presented clear, logical connections between actions and outcomes. The room's energy shifted. The audience leaned in, the cameras lingered, and even Trump's demeanor flickered. There was the faintest hint of frustration, an acknowledgement that this exchange was not going according to his usual rhythm. Trump attempted to pivot, referencing achievements, crowd sizes, and economic data, the classic metrics designed to assert authority and shift focus. But Crockett's calm, factual rebuttals made these points feel somewhat superficial. She reminded the audience of the core issues, redirecting attention to accountability, consistency, and integrity. Each time she did so, it subtly eroded the narrative Trump was trying to dominate. The interplay between aggression and composure became increasingly pronounced. Trump's body language became more assertive, his gestures larger, his tone slightly sharper. Crockett's presence remained a counterbalance, calm, precise, measured, unwavering. It was a classic contrast of political styles, forceful projection versus disciplined composure, and it created a compelling narrative for both live and home audiences. As the second segment of the debate drew to a close, the audience could feel a shift. The room that had initially leaned toward the expected dynamic, Trump dominating the discussion, was now evenly split in energy. Viewers were not just absorbing facts, they were watching a psychological duel. The subtle power play, the tension between dominance and composure, had captured attention. Even without shouting or dramatic theatrics, the stakes had never felt higher. The stage was set for what was to come next, the third question, the moment that would become pivotal in defining this debate, shaping perception and revealing leadership styles under pressure. The groundwork laid in segment 2, the calm contrast, the subtle energy shifts, the audience reactions, all pointed toward the dramatic turning point that was about to unfold.
Everything in the room had been building toward this moment. The tension, the measured responses, the calculated interruptions, the subtle psychological duel between Donald Trump and Jasmine Crockett. And then it came, the third question. On paper, it looked simple, too simple even. But the phrasing carried weight. The moderator read it slowly, deliberately. Should leaders take responsibility when their public statements create division, even if those statements energize their base? The question wasn't an attack, and no names were mentioned, yet everyone in the room instantly understood the implied target. The atmosphere shifted. Breath slowed, eyes focused. The cameras zoomed in. Every viewer watching sensed the pivot point had arrived. Trump smiled first, that familiar smile that usually signals command and control. He leaned slightly forward, projecting confidence. His response was polished, controlled, measured. Leadership requires strength, he said. Strong leaders are often misunderstood. He referenced media coverage, claiming critics exaggerated his words and misinterpreted his intentions. Applause from some corners of the audience punctuated the points, reinforcing the narrative he had hoped to control. But then came the subtle pivot, the critical move. Without mentioning names, Trump implied that some politicians thrived on division for personal gain. The insinuation was sharp, indirect, yet unmistakable. Every eye in the room followed Crockett's reaction, searching for signs of flinching, of indignation, of anything that could be weaponized against her. Crockett did none of those things. She inhaled slowly, maintaining calm posture. Her eyes remained focused. No raised voice, no abrupt gestures. And then she began to speak. Her words were measured, deliberate, each sentence building on the previous. Accountability isn't about strength or weakness, she said. It's about consistency. She referenced specific statements, documented remarks, and moments where rhetoric had escalated tension instead of fostering unity. Her points were factual, precise, devoid of theatrics, yet they landed with clarity. Then, in a subtle but powerful move, Crockett posed a question back. Not aggressive, not confrontational, simply logical and pointed. If division continues to occur around the same voice, at what point does that voice take responsibility? The room reacted almost imperceptibly but noticeably. A few nodded, others glanced at one another, and the cameras lingered on the faces of live viewers, capturing reactions that ranged from intrigue to quiet surprise. Trump attempted to regain control. His responses grew firmer, slightly louder, but the focus had shifted. Instead of responding to the question, he leaned on achievements, polling numbers, crowd sizes, and economic metrics. He tried to dominate the narrative through authority and past performance. But Crockett didn't interrupt, didn't counteract with theatrics. She waited for the moderator's cue, then calmly refocused the discussion on accountability. Leadership isn't tested when things are calm, she said. It's tested when emotions are high. Real strength is lowering the temperature, not raising it. That simple, calm articulation did something remarkable. The energy in the room shifted completely. The third question, which had seemed ordinary at first, became the turning point. The contrast was undeniable. Trump's usual dominance through confidence and projection now appeared reactive. Crockett's measured approach appeared authoritative and credible. The camera zoomed in every nuance, Trump adjusting his tie, leaning forward, trying to pivot, and Crockett sitting steady, unflinching, controlling the moment with quiet precision. Viewers at home could feel it unfolding in real time. This wasn't loud, chaotic, or theatrics. There were no dramatic shouts or viral insults. Instead, the drama was psychological, intellectual, and strategic. Control had subtly shifted. For the first time, Trump's energy, his attempts to dominate, were being countered not by volume, but by calm authority, clarity, and poise. The moderator moved on, but the momentum did not reset. The cameras lingered on reactions. Some commentators whispered, others scribbled notes. Clips of the third question began circulating online almost immediately. Analysts highlighted not what was shouted, but what was answered. The debate had become a case study in leadership under scrutiny, public accountability, and communication strategy. Trump attempted a closing strategy. He leaned back, projecting confidence, summarizing achievements, and trying to reinforce the narrative of strength and control. Supporters clapped. The expected audience energy surged. But even in this attempt, the previous exchange had subtly undermined his rhythm. Every point about achievements contrasted against Crockett's calm emphasis on responsibility. The juxtaposition was clear. The narrative had shifted. Crockett's final words resonated. No name-calling, no repetition of prior arguments, simply a distilled philosophy of leadership responsibility, understanding the weight of influence, recognizing the consequences of public words, and demonstrating consistency in high-pressure situations. Her tone never faltered, her composure never wavered, and the audience responded, thoughtfully, with measured applause, an acknowledgement of clarity rather than performance. The third question, and Crockett's response, became the story that dominated conversation long after the camera shut off. Political observers debated not who spoke louder, but who answered more effectively. The exchange highlighted the difference between leadership by projection versus leadership by substance. It became a template for analyzing high-stakes communication, demonstrating that influence and control can be asserted quietly, without theatrics. As the debate concluded, no dramatic handshake or viral outburst marked the ending. Instead, the quiet power of calm, precise answers carried far beyond the room. Clips of the exchange circulated online, gaining traction not for volume, but for clarity and impact. Political commentators dissected it repeatedly, highlighting how Crockett had maintained composure under pressure, while forcing subtle recognition of accountability and responsibility. For viewers, the lesson was clear. Sometimes the loudest turning point in politics is the quietest. The third question, which seemed unassuming at first, had done more than challenge a candidate. It had revealed contrasts in leadership styles, exposed how power and control can be subtly contested, and demonstrated the strategic effectiveness of composure. Even in a debate dominated by personalities, charisma, and media spectacle, the narrative had shifted. Trump entered intending to assert dominance and control the room, but the quiet authority of Crockett, responding with clarity and restraint, changed the perception. Influence, it became evident, isn't always exerted through volume or theatrics. Sometimes it's the measured, consistent, and calm response that commands attention and shapes the conversation. As the debate concluded, no dramatic handshake or viral outburst marked the ending. Instead, the quiet power of calm, precise answers carried far beyond the room. Clips of the exchange circulated online, gaining traction not for volume, but for clarity and impact. Political commentators dissected it repeatedly, highlighting how Crockett had maintained composure under pressure, while forcing subtle recognition of accountability and responsibility. For viewers, the lesson was clear. Sometimes the loudest turning point in politics is the quietest. The third question, which seemed unassuming at first, had done more than challenge a candidate. It had revealed contrasts in leadership styles, exposed how power and control can be subtly contested, and demonstrated the strategic effectiveness of composure. Even in a debate dominated by personalities, charisma, and media spectacle, the narrative had shifted. Trump entered intending to assert dominance and control the room, but the quiet authority of Crockett, responding with clarity and restraint, changed the perception. Influence, it became evident, isn't always exerted through volume or theatrics. Sometimes it's the measured, consistent, and calm response that commands attention and shapes the conversation. As the lights dimmed and the camera stopped rolling, the significance of that single exchange lingered. It had become the highlight of the evening. The clip replayed, discussed, and analyzed across media platforms. The room may have returned to normal, but the momentum had irreversibly shifted. Control, at least in perception, had passed, not through force, but through quiet, deliberate, strategic communication.